and welcome to Comically Pedantic, where we take a detailed look at the complicated concepts, characters, and history of comic book culture. I'm your host, Eric L. Chase, and joining me on this episode again is the wonderful Corinne Levy.
We're back. It's a trilogy, maybe a franchise. We don't know.
We're finally going to be starting the ComicsGate story after we did 2 episodes of not ComicsGate. So we're finally going to get into an area that I at least have much more of an understanding of.
We did the prelude, and now we're doing just the lude. I forget what the real word.
Before we get started, I just wanted to ask: do you have like a bright spot for this week?
Do I? I don't know. It's been so crazy. I got cider with friends. That was fun. I like beverages and fruit, so good combination. I spent literally this whole day before us recording just watching Gilmore Girls.
Oh, wonderful show.
I didn't know how much I would love Gilmore Girls until I started watching it. And my goodness, it is fantastic. I literally sat there like a stay-at-home mom. I was like embroidering. Maybe it's a stay-at-home grandma. I was embroidering and just watching Gilmore Girls for a couple hours, to the point where I was like, I need to get up and move. So.
Wait, how far into it are you? Like, what season are you on?
Oh, I'm literally only in season 1. Like, she just had her formal at Chilton, and like her and Dean are like officially boyfriend and girlfriend. It's literally the episode, so like, of the dance. So she falls asleep.
Oh, yeah.
Oh no, I hope I don't spoil it for your listeners. But she falls asleep in the dance studio.
A 20-year-old show, I think. Right?
I know, but it. Listen,
there's an episode later on where like they get into like this internet thing. I hope it sticks around.
Yeah, well, the show has never been spoiled for me, so I'm trying not to do it for anybody else. Yeah. But there was a big fight, and now I'm between Lorelai and Rory, and I'm like, oh no! And then I didn't go back to watch the next episode because that's when I was like, my legs need to extend.
I don't want to ruin anything for you. It's Austin actually introduced me to the to Gilmore Girls, and it is one of my favorite shows. We watch it all the time.
Yeah.
I can say whenever Austin is having trouble with her mom, I can tell because her comfort show is Gilmore Girls. She'll curl up and she'll get some chicken nuggets and she'll watch Gilmore Girls. It's
honestly like such a mother-daughter show, like in the best way possible. Like, and I haven't seen a show like that before. So shout out to Gilmore Girls for making me be like, oh, I should call my mom. Like, it's very nice. I love it.
I am looking forward to your journey through this show because we flew through it quickly.
I'll keep you updated. Yeah. I usually do like one, maybe 2 episodes a day, like at night or something.
Yeah.
But today I was like 4 episodes. So
that's kind of what we did. We were watching Buffy, and we took a break from Buffy to watch all of Gilmore Girls. And then we came back and finished Buffy. I think
once I finish Gilmore Girls, and if I ever finish The Witcher, Buffy will be the next thing for me because I've never seen it. It's never been like around, like available whenever I'm like, oh, I should watch it. It like leaves a streaming service, and it's just like crap when it does that.
If you need, I don't know if I still do. I used to have all of the DVDs.
I do have a DVD player, so that would help me.
I was obsessed. I read all of the comics before they just did a reboot of them. But
okay, cool.
The comic books followed. Well, they had some that came out during the show, and then they had some that came out after the show. And when the ones that came out after the show were produced by Joss Whedon, so they were like the official continuation. And they had a lot of the writers from the show.
Gotcha.
So it was interesting. I think they got better as they went on, because I think early on they were like, we have no budget. We can do whatever we want.
Yeah, and it's also like, to a lot of people, it's like that had a finite end probably, and they're just like, how do we continue? So you kind of got to like get back on the horse.
Yeah.
With a different horse.
I was happy with the way Buffy ended. Austin was not. She very much thought it was anticlimactic, but I thought it was really good. But
That's fair.
I mean, the overall last season is hit or miss.
Heard. Okay. Yeah, that's how I felt about Game of Thrones. I was like, oh boy, how's it gonna be? And then I was like, I'm sad. So hopefully that doesn't happen again when I watch Buffy, but I'm sure I'll be fine.
Well, I mean, if you do, you can always just follow it up with watching Angel, and I absolutely loved that show. That
Oh,
was
okay.
it was the spinoff show.
Yeah.
All right.
Cool. I dig it.
Getting into our actual topic instead of spending forever talking about just what we want to talk about.
Maybe that'll be like a break episode. If things get too sad, I'll do a report on something. And
Love
it'll
it.
just be like, here's a thing I like. Ta-da. But anyway, the sad stuff. Let's do it.
While Gamergate laid the groundwork for a change in how the public interacted with creators, critics, and publishers, bad faith actors took note of how easily co-opted an online movement can be. We already learned how Breitbart, Stormfront, and other far-right political propagandists embraced Gamergate as a way to mainstream their ideas while swelling their ranks, but that's not the whole story. The increased focus on political issues and outright xenophobic or misogynistic harassment within Gamergate and throughout Twitter gave rise to the alt-right and extremist culture that fueled President Trump's election and the storming of the US Capitol. This political push online may seem like the beginning of ComicsGate, which published a blacklist of creators' names that were seen as social justice warriors to boycott, but the actual start is far more similar to Gamergate than just that. It all starts with a group of women and some milkshakes.
I like milkshake.
Now, before we...
I was going to ask if you had a favorite flavor before it got too dark.
Of milkshake? I don't know.
Yeah.
I'm
all about the black and white. I like a black and white milkshake.
That sounds good.
It's very good. I don't
usually
get milkshakes. Oh, get some and some fries. Do it. It'll heal you.
Now, before we get into all of that, I think it's important to discuss the state of comic book fandom and the world at this time. By late 2016, Gamergate had already taken hold of some of the major online arenas and led to several death threats against women. Now, it's hard to underline just how big of a cultural shift this was at the time, and comic book communities were not immune. When the 8th issue of Mockingbird was released, featuring a cover by artist Joelle Jones and depicting the titular character wearing a t-shirt with the phrase, "Ask me about my feminist agenda," social media went wild. The mere presence of a woman, even a fictional one, advocating for feminism was enough to cause immediate harassment of those involved. The comic, first to be headlined by the Mockingbird character, was also the first foray of best-selling novelist Chelsea Cain into comic book writing. Unfortunately, it also led to the first instance of Cain needing to block Twitter users due to threatening messages. Not long after that harassment became public knowledge, several prominent creators came out to condemn the behavior, with most tweeting the hashtag #StandWithChelseaCain. The abuse was too much, however, and Chelsea deleted her account shortly after. The harassers had accomplished their goal, chasing away a woman who dared to make their opinion heard. And from here, it would only get worse.
Yeah, this already sounds a lot like the beginning of Gamergate, like in almost like a weird, like cookie cutter way. Like a woman is like, I want to make a thing, and it ends up being not exactly what the traditional image is.
And look, I didn't read the Mockingbird comic book at the time, not really for any reason other than I just wasn't super interested. I was reading other things. I think in 2016, I was heavily into a lot of Image comic books, so I wasn't even really looking at Marvel that much.
Did you end up reading it like in the future, or?
Yeah, I went, especially when when this became such a
part of the research, right?
Yes. It's good. Like it's not anything. I wouldn't be like, oh, this is worth any humongous reaction from anyone. It's a lot of fun.
Just kind of like, I read a book. Book was good. Move on to the next book. Yeah.
So that was all in that was 2016. And then you move into 2017 and things get a little rocky. Marvel Comics was having a very difficult time. That was a hard year for Marvel. And there's a lot of reasons.
That kind of surprises me. I feel like at that point, like the movies were starting to pick up, or maybe they moved on later.
The comic books were not doing so hot.
Oh, I guess I just kind of figured it would
there's a
correlate.
There's a bit of correlation, but not as much as you would think.
Okay.
So by like July of 2017, Marvel Comics had dominated the comic book landscape, a feat which was not unusual, but that also coincided with this steep decline for the industry as a whole. So like it wasn't just Marvel that was going down, but
Right.
Marvel in particular had a lot of problems.
Okay.
So like as Marvel came out on top, their sales figures fell short of previous years, which indicated something might be going wrong in the realm of comics. And this drop in sales pointed to by critics as an indicator of growing frustration with the company's politics. But the truth shows that there are several issues that plagued Marvel and the industry throughout the year. Comics just weren't selling like they used to, and public perception became laser focused on the company sitting on top, which in this case is Marvel.
Yeah.
As the Hollywood Reporter detailed, nearly every month of 2017 brought a new controversy to Marvel Comics. From Captain America supposedly being a Nazi all along, to an artist sneaking political messages into their art about forbidding Christian leaders in a Muslim nation, scandal was no stranger to the company. So, I don't know if you're aware of the Captain America controversy or
no,
the
I
other
was
one.
about to ask you.
Just a brief overview. They did this company-wide crossover and an event called Secret Empire. And the whole idea was that Captain America had been a sleeper Nazi for this entire time.
Oh.
And when the writers and the editors came out, they were saying, no, this is not like a fake Captain America. This is really Captain America. He's really a Nazi. He's always been a Nazi. And that pissed a lot of people off. I mean...
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. Captain America is not my favorite. Like, in Marvel terms, I would go with, like, Scarlet Witch and Vision. I'm just like, wow, healthy relationship duo, equally important. That's great. I don't know. That does seem like a very bizarre way to take it. I guess, like, it's American symbolism. So it's like, I get it, but it's also like, you want the people who are reading comics, they're like, the superhero, I feel like, is always supposed to be like the role model. And then if you're like, hey, this role model that we've had for decades, Nazi, I guess that would be a little tough to swallow.
So I think it gets a little bit more complicated because you also have to look at the creators of Captain America, both Jewish and both fought in World War II. So you're taking this character that was specifically created as a symbol of America in fighting, not like the first issue of Captain America, the cover of it is him punching Hitler in the face.
Yeah.
Like that's what you're going for. And it seemed like, keep in mind, this is also 2017. This is Trump's first year in office. There's a lot going on here that is making people very uncomfortable, very worried about what,
Yeah.
And then the other storyline here that I kind of briefly mentioned was there was an artist for the X-Men comics, and he hid a lot of messages in the background of his art. And one of them was a quote, or was a pointing to a quote. And it was about how you couldn't accept Christian leaders in a Muslim nation. And it was very heavily implied to be like, we cannot coexist as brothers in this, And he took a lot of flack for that, and was also, I mean, I feel deservedly. He did not really defend himself very well. But that's kind of where Marvel is. You have these things happening, and it feels like month after month there's a new thing. And it's like that Hollywood Reporter article that I referenced went through multiple things that happened all in the year of 2017 that really screwed over Marvel as a whole.
Yeah.
And like, for those that only somewhat were paying attention, it seemed like there was always something new to be concerned with, and therefore none of it could be too concerning. Like, if the norm is that there's always a reason to be upset, then the narrative becomes boring. This is an easy way for general audiences or mainstream news to miss a new controversy, because they're like, well, why do I care about this one? There was one last week. That you saw that a lot with like the Trump presidency.
Yeah, because it was just honestly like a constant state of like frustration. So it's like when you're in that constant state of like, I'm annoyed, I'm annoyed, I'm annoyed, like everything just starts to kind of like be white noise of
Right.
annoyance and it doesn't change anything.
And
So
like in that situation, like the stakes needed to be raised to garner any more attention. It has to be something big.
yeah.
And like in fact, the very article that I referenced that details the onslaught of public outrage at Marvel ignores the incident that started the ComicsGate movement entirely, since at the time it had no real impact on mainstream comics news. It was just a thing that happened, and they were like, "There's nothing to write about here." It seemed inconsequential because that's exactly what it was. An editor from Marvel named Heather Antos gathered with some of her friends in honor of Flo Steinberg, the
Mhm.
recently deceased industry icon partially responsible for the company's growth into a juggernaut. To commemorate the event, the women posted a picture of themselves enjoying milkshakes, which was a favorite of Steinberg's.
Oh,
They posted this on Twitter, and for some, this image of women enjoying themselves was a step too far. The outpour of anger started immediately. As the Mary Sue reported, quote, the public tweets included plenty of the usual insults and misogyny. Fake geek girls, the creepiest collection of stereotypical SJWs anyone could possibly imagine, and gee, I can't imagine why Marvel's sales are in the toilet. Others took to harassing Antos via direct message. So that's where we are. This is the start of Comicsgate here.
yeah, it already annoys me. Those comments are so familiar. And like, this is honestly like these comments are the reason I was like so nervous to get into comics. But
Yeah.
then
Well,
thankfully,
of
like,
course.
yeah, because it's like I want to like a thing. I don't want to have to like it in a very specific way because it's like I don't know how I'm gonna react to shit. But I got really lucky with like the first comic store I went into. Like the guy that ran it um was just like the nicest dude. Like Supernatural was on like the TV in the corner
Oh,
and
that's a great show.
like, oh, yeah, and it was my favorite at the time too. So, like, he would talk to me about that, and I'd be like, "Oh, like, where could I find, like, blah, blah, blah?" And he was literally, like, the nicest person about it. So, shout out to that guy. I don't know what his name is, um, but I'll find out one day, and I'll thank him.
Well, also, that the whole like fake geek girl and stuff like that, it doesn't matter what your credentials are. You're gonna have that. That's the Heather
Yeah.
Antos being the editor here at Marvel. At that point, had already worked as an editor on like a few things, including the Star Wars line
Mhm.
at Marvel Comics. Like, so she's done this. She's been there for a while, and just recently was promoted to senior editor at IDW. Like,
Yeah.
she
Congrats.
knew her shit, but like, you can't be a woman and have like a dissenting opinion in this space.
And it's kind of in a lot of places. Like, I was watching a video that really just, like, spoke my brain, and it was a little off topic. It was kind of discussing the concept of, like, being basic and, like, shaming people for being basic, particularly women. And at the end, it's like women will be criticized for what they like and don't like no matter what.
Yes.
Like, if like, I kind of go up to somebody and be like, "Hi, I like playing, like, video games and, like, I like drinking beer and I like reading comic books." They would be like, "Oh, you're a pick me," or like, "Oh, you know,
Mm-hmm.
you're like a fake gamer girl." And it's like, "Well, I do have games, um, and I do occupy female space, so I don't know how you can argue this." But yeah, it's everywhere, whether you like to wear Uggs and drink pumpkin spice lattes or, you know, read Batman. So,
Yeah,
it's tough out here, man.
it's all awful.
Yeah.
And at this time, some fans did rush to defend Antos, but it was too little, too late. Like something had already started.
That seems a bit different from Gamergate, though. I feel like so there's at least a little bit of support because it seems like, Zoe and all of them, it seems like we didn't hear much about the people that were like, "Hey," standing up for them.
I think in terms of Gamergate, those people existed, but they were drowned out, and some
Yeah.
were run out. There were people who like lost their livelihoods because they said they stood.
Yeah.
In this regard, it's just a lot of people yelling. It's very very much whining a
Which
lot.
is a little it's a little relieving. It's
Mhm.
nice to hear that nobody's been doxxed yet, because that's always really concerning and
Yeah.
stuff like that. But anyway.
So while this wasn't the first issue to bring such vitriol online, it was definitely seen by many as a concerted effort to blame social causes for declining sales or what they deemed poor storytelling. After all, these women were being promoted on the basis of being women, according to these critics. Then, if that's the case, clearly the storytelling is going to suffer because they don't have any reason to be there. The sentiment may seem odd, but the full picture would come into a sharp focus as the movement began in earnest. Still, ComicsGate didn't quite have a strong stance yet. That changed just a few short months later when Marvel faced a very rough time at New York Comic Con. While many issues arose in New York, the strangest happened right before the convention even began. While Diamond held their exclusive breakfast panel for comic book retailers, some in attendance expressed dismay over Marvel's recent creative decisions. Some of these retailers demonstrated anger at the increased portrayal of non-white, non-male headlining characters. Words like homo and black were shouted alongside freaking females, with one retailer going so far as to complain about the recently out Iceman kissing other men. The push against social progress had now found a voice at the table. So I don't know if you know, like, any of the controversy about Iceman, because it's, I think, very dumb.
I also think it's dumb. It seems very similar to the new Superman
Yeah,
being, like,
it's exactly
bisexual.
like that.
Like,
It
why
is
does it
exactly
matter?
that.
He's not gonna pop out of your comic and make out with you, though, like, I would believe most of us wish that he would, because he is beautiful. But
Yeah.
but still, he's not
Well,
gonna pop out.
the argument for Iceman was he's been around since the 60s, and why is he just now coming out? But if you actually know the character, it fits. He
And
had an
also, in the
abusive
'60s, a
family,
lot of people couldn't come out because
right?
it wasn't safe for them.
Like the character had an abusive family. He had he had a lot of girlfriends that he never seemed to be able to commit to. There was a lot of little things here and there
Right.
that I think, in retrospect, come out much stronger as oh yeah, this man is definitely gay.
Yeah.
So this may come as a surprise to some, but comic books have had a long history on both progressive and regressive sides of the aisle. For every positive representation of a person of color is a story of a judge intervening to refuse a black man to be represented as an astronaut. I do want to cover that story at some point one day. That was a really interesting, very inspiring story. EC Comics, before they folded, did
Mhm.
a comic book where they wanted a an astronaut to be involved, and at the end, the astronaut would take their helmet off, and it would be a black man. And part
Cool.
of the comic panel was the sweat on the man's skin would kind of it would be very similar to stars in the night sky. It was really beautiful,
Aw,
and
yeah,
they were ordered not to publish it. They did it anyway. Um,
good. Show
um,
this beautiful man, this beautiful sweaty man.
right. And for every strong female character in comics, there are a dozen or more of women that exist solely as objects or plot points.
Yeah, well, I mean, you have that whole episode on fridging, and,
You were right.
is not people have not gotten out of the refrigerator yet.
Right.
There's still a lot of leftovers we need to take care of, please. But yeah, no, and like I said, like, I'm reading Birds of Prey right now, and, like, yeah, they are, like, really cool badass women. They
Hmm.
are still drawn very classically, like, sexy femme fatale ladies, like, with the
Right.
boobs out. It's like, I just don't want you to get stabbed in the titty, like, there's only so much fat that will stop something from impaling your heart, you know?
There are a couple of comic book characters where artists have just gradually changed them throughout the years. Even one of my favorite horror comic books, Hack Slash.
Yeah.
The creator, he's got a lot of he does a lot of pinups. He does a lot of like sexy girls and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And you know, they did a team up with Suicide Girls, so they did like an issue that like featured some of the ladies from Suicide Girls, and then at the end there was like a nude pinup of the main character of the comic book. So they do a lot of like that kind of thing. But he also has fought with artists that he's brought on to the series to draw for him about making sure that she's supposed to have like a B cup, like a small B cup. And like a lot of them came on, and the first thing they did was start making her boobs gigantic. And he's
Oh, well,
like,
at
what are
least
you
he's
doing?
like, it seems like he's trying to show different body sizes, and that's cool. I'm a fan of that. Like, if you're gonna listen, okay, TED Talk. If you're gonna show sexy people, the sexy people are all different. It's not all the same cookie cutter. So find different cookie cutters, and then you can make them hot. That's fine.
I will also say he headlined the Nightwing comic book for a while, and he definitely highlighted Dick Grayson as a sexy man too. So he's
That's good
equal
then.
opportunity, you know.
Then maybe his thing is just sexy people. But it is nice when the market doesn't just have like, you know, that kind of stuff. I appreciate that, and I appreciate this man.
In addition to all of these, like queer and disabled characters are often, they only get like a handful of stories spread out over decades, and even then they're not handled that well. So you have like representation there, but not a lot. And none of this is to say that the good representation that's out there or the hard work put in by the editors, writers, and artists means nothing. These things should be applauded, especially those that did the work in a time when they weren't all that popular, like the aforementioned Black Astronaut in Weird Fantasy. So to them, it was important to find creative ways to get their message across because the message itself was important. Like Marvel's own X-Men, who utilized the mutant metaphor as a way to represent wildly different communities. This is a fun way to tell a story with a deeper meaning, but this also comes at the expense of actually representing these communities and what they go through.
Yeah.
So, like, one of my favorite comic book podcasts, Jay and Miles Explain the X-Men. The one of them, Jay Edidin, did an interview with the Daily Beast, and they were quoted as saying the X-Men are a metaphor for the Black experience in America, and in America where Black people are extremely disproportionately targeted for police violence because of projected and inaccurate perceptions of a threat is a problem. When you try to use it as a metaphor directly for that, it falls apart. And it falls apart in potentially damaging ways. And I completely agree with that sentiment.
Yeah, I think that's very similar to like the Percy Jackson series. So, did you ever read like The Lightning Thief and stuff like that?
No, I never did.
Okay, it's a young adult series, and it's basically about like Greek gods like exist, and they will sometimes hook up with like humans and create demigods, and the demigods have like a whole camp, and it's like, you know, it's very like, it's kind of like Harry Potter but with Greek mythology.
Right.
But a lot of these demigods, you know, before they're like claimed by their godly parent or whatever, it's like they'll be dealing with things like dyslexia or like ADHD, but in the book they describe it as like, oh, those aren't, you know, disorders, those are like your fighting reflexes, or, you know, your ability to like decipher like these hidden things in the real world. So some people kind of argue like that, hey, this was like a really cool way to kind of show people like, hey, you know, you're you can be like a superhero no matter what kind of like, you know, ability or disability you have. Like, you know, there's a guy in the book who is like presents like in a wheelchair, but in real life he's like this really badass like centaur guy. So it's like kind of like, hey, in the real world, like, you know, all these people could be like super amazing, like impactful heroes. And it was a very cool way. Like, it was argued like, oh, is this like a little out of touch now? And I think you could argue either way, but it is like a cool kind of similar thing. Like, hey, these people can be represented as
I literally
awesome
have
beings.
never heard this, and people have brought up Percy Jackson to me so many times. That's never been a thing that anyone's mentioned to me. That's so interesting.
Yeah,
No.
it comes up in like the first book. because he's like, "Oh, I'm Percy Jackson, and I'm 11 years old, and I can't read well, and, like, I just fidget all the time, and I just feel, like, super alone." But then he goes to, like, it's called Camp Half-Blood, which is where all, like, the demigods go, and they're like, "No, no, no, like, you."
Interesting name.
Yeah, I know, right? But it's like, you and it's like, "No, no, no, you fidgeting is, that's your fighting reflexes, so you're gonna be able to dodge, like, like, lightning bolts, like, super fast and, like, all this stuff." Or like, "No, no, no, like, you mixing up letters isn't, you know, just this, like, dyslexia or whatever, like, look closely and you'll find, like, this Greek message you've been looking for your quest." And it's like, "Oh, shit, I'm cool." Like, and I'm not alone. It's very nice. I think it's a really sweet series. I, like, just kind of reread it this past year, and I was like, "Oh, good young adult book. I recommend to mainly children, but for everybody also."
Right. Yeah. I mean, I read kids' books. I watch cartoons all the time. I get it.
Yeah, why not?
And in terms of comic books, like Cyclops from the X-Men, if he's supposed to represent someone from the disabled community, like that kind of works in terms of like him as a person in the comic books, but you're still not actually representing someone with a disability in the comic book. So you've now erased that community from existing, you
Mhm,
know? Like the mutant metaphor can work, but if it takes the place of an actual identity, then you're effectively cutting that identity out of the narrative and you're left with more stories of predominantly cis white straight men. Like, it's no surprise then that Marvel and other companies would see diversity as a way to entice new readers. And that's why just a few short years before the start of ComicsGate, you got long-standing characters like Wolverine and Thor stepping aside to allow their mantles to be adopted by women, or why the Hulk moniker was adopted by an Asian American, or even Ms. Marvel was suddenly the name of a Muslim girl from Jersey City. These changes matter, and it was a gamble that Marvel undertook to see if it amounted to sales. And this is the reason for the retailer pushback, the anger at seeing female editors, and why comics were about to develop their own hate campaign. As Eric Francisco wrote, quote, "Unlike most Gate scandals, there wasn't one thing that kicked off ComicsGate, a name attached organically and has trended throughout 2017.
mm,
Unlike its ancestor Gamergate, the demands by ComicsGate are unclear. Sure, Gamergate began when a guy got mad at his ex, but at least it pretended to aspire to something bigger in its call for ethics in gaming journalism. ComicsGate, meanwhile, seems to just want less diversity, both in characters and creators, in an attempt to save comics and keep the medium white, male, and familiar. That's it. Comic sales have slowed, that much is true, especially compared to the early 90s when the speculator boom was at its highest. But book sales have slowed across the board, along with prose literature, in the face of changing media. But the profile for comics have never been higher, as mainstream pop culture is actually excited for a movie featuring Thanos and the Infinity Stones. Not only are the demands made by Comicsgate an offensive idea, they don't make sense. We've seen this before. It happened with video games and science fiction literature. Despite the complicated origin story worthy of a supervillain, Comicsgate isn't anything new. It's little more than the latest irate gasp of fading white hegemony in geek culture, which I think does a really good job of summing up where these people are coming from.
yeah, I think so too. I mean, yeah, I don't know if I can say any more than that, 'cause it's true. I don't understand why people don't think, like, nerds can be all different shapes, sizes, sexes, and colors. Like,
Well, it's
you
not
like what
necessarily, they're
it
not arguing that the fans can't be that.
but even the medium, though, like,
Right.
my favorite, comic series, right, is Saga. I will talk about Saga until the day I die,
Right.
and if I look at I don't think there's a single white person in it, which is fine. Like, I don't we could think
Maybe.
about it now. Maybe?
I'm thinking maybe the mercenary, maybe him. I don't remember his
Oh,
name.
yeah, that's the Will.
The Will. I
So,
think the Will is white.
I think so? Okay. I
It's hard to
forgot of
tell.
and honestly, the Will is not my favorite character.
No.
He started
No.
off, I was like, "Okay, he's cool," and then he made decisions, and I was like, "I don't like the decisions you make."
The one good decision he made was saving that little girl.
That's true, and that's when I was like, "Oh, I like this guy," and then he
Yeah.
did something fucking stupid after a thing that I won't say because I won't spoil Saga for anybody. I refuse. Gilmore Girls, maybe. Saga, never. Um, but yeah, like, there's a whole tons of different characters and different bodies and, like, if anything, I think it just makes the story better. And
Yeah.
kind of like with the X-Men, how it's like, it talks to I think there is a character, what I'm saying, in that series that anyone could, like, connect with. I
Oh,
feel like
yeah.
yeah, and that's, like, the bottom line of creating media. You just want it to connect to somebody, to make somebody happy. Like, I'm a culinary person. My thing is, like, I wanna make food to make people happy. I want it to like, I could make a dozen, like, I don't know, sous vide steaks, and if one person enjoys it, I will be like, "Yes, this one person enjoys it." Like, thank goodness. Like, that's all that media should be. So, man, people need to understand that it's like, "Oh, this isn't for me. I'll move on."
Right.
That's my
That's
TED Talk. That's the official Corinne TED Talk of today.
I will also say I am a huge X-Men fan. And I will be the first person to be incredibly critical of the X-Men comics. Like it's there. You can pick it apart if you want to. So
Yeah,
like
and that's fine. I mean, it's the same with Sex and the City fans. Like, yes, that was
Mhm.
very progressive and cool for the 90s. I think it came out
Mhm.
in the 90s. But, like, yeah, there's definitely some, like, homophobic shit that happens in there, and you can take a note of that and be like, "Alright, this doesn't hold up to today's standards. I understand this, and I know better,
Yeah.
and now I can continue watching it."
Abso- There's
Yeah.
gonna be some stuff in Gilmore Girls that's a similar thing.
Oh, already is.
Yeah. Uh, the
Etiquette.
to
Of
bring
course
to bring
there
it
is.
back a little bit to ComicsGate, an
Yeah.
interesting thing here is um there's this idea that ComicsGate has no real ideology, right? Like, I mean, that's a little bit of what I quoted before. They're like, they're not really aiming for anything except for white and straight and male. And the truth is, nearly every participant will give different answers. The
Mm.
unifying factor tends to be an emphasis on removing politics from writing, or at least that's what they claim. So, comic creator Chuck Dixon, a ComicsGate supporter, went so far as to say he wanted to create an apolitical publisher that he kept politics out of his personal work. But also, he made it clear he was going to be making political comic books for the right. So he effectively gives away the game. It's not about comics being political. It's about them not catering to their personal tastes.
I was gonna say, like, almost all media has always been political. Like, I have, it's like a 12 issue of Scarlet Witch and the Vision,
Yeah.
and there's literally an issue that had I forget his name. Crap, I forget his name. It's Iron Fist's buddy.
Luke
Um,
Cage.
yeah, it's got Luke Cage in it, and
Yeah.
they're talking about, like, I guess it was around the time where MLK Day became, like, an official holiday,
Hmm.
and, like, that was a very big discussion in that comic issue. Like, so yeah, that was forever ago. Not forever ago, but years and years ago. Like, there's always politics in anything that you read and see and whatever.
That's something. So Chuck Dixon here, um, what he's actually fighting against is what he would call social justice warrior changers to the comic book canon, which is a loaded phrase. Like the oppositional stance that they've taken on social issues, which include race and gender, that is all tied into this. Like we've covered how they've reacted to gay characters, female legacy heroes, and even just female editors in comic books. But these same social issues are often adopted by the right wing as part of what a sociologist James Davison Hunter has described as the latest iteration of culture wars.
Mm.
It's the same as Gamergate. Fighting for the removal of something that they don't like is really a way to demand a return to the status quo and ignoring the communities who have rarely had a presence in the industry. That's not a new thing. After World War II, there was a massive investment in education, which led to a society more strongly tied to knowledge than theology. This caused a cultural shift, one which continues to today.
Yeah.
The rise of what James Davison Hunter described as post-Enlightenment culture and the way information is spread throughout universities caused a panic amongst these with far more conservative views. As he puts it, quote, conservatives see this as an existential threat. That's an important phrase. They see it as an existential threat to their way of life, to the things that they hold sacred. So while the earlier culture war really was about secularization and positions were tied to theologies and justified on the basis of theologies, that's no longer the case.
Mhm.
You rarely see people on the right rooting their positions within a biblical theology on ecclesiastical tradition. It is a position that is mainly rooted in fear of extinction. And that, I think, is an important phrase.
Yeah.
Fear of extinction. I think that really gives context to how these people are feeling. Like when it comes to a character changing, they're afraid of being erased, which is bullshit anyway.
Yeah, like the fear is like arguably valid, but the thing that they're afraid of isn't real. Does
right.
that make sense?
Your feelings are valid, but what
Yes.
you're feeling about doesn't exist.
Yeah, exactly. Like it's okay to be scared about the monster in your closet, but like the monster doesn't exist.
Yeah.
So,
That's important to note because fear of extinction is a phrase that in modern context has morphed into its own conspiracy theory, the Great Replacement. And you'll see that all the time on like Tucker Carlson. For years, many in the white supremacist movement pushed the narrative that non-white immigrants were used to replace the native white Europeans or Americans. Popularized by French writer and critic Renaud Camus, I think. I don't know how to pronounce French names. I'm going to go with that. The theory
maybe
gained
it's Camille. I don't know. I don't know.
The theory gained traction amongst groups already concerned and with a coming white genocide. Since many white supremacists in America blame the Jews for a great deal of issues, including immigration, the theory quickly came to become shorthand for Jews replacing whites, which directly led to these white supremacists marching in Charlottesville for Unite the Right rally, shouting, "Jews will not replace us." All of this exists despite there being no real evidence of a replacement being perpetuated, a coming white extinction, or why it matters to begin with, since race is a social fucking construct. Representation matters because we live in a society where whiteness and masculinity have become the default due to those in power largely being white and male.
Yeah.
We acknowledge race because that's how society has been structured, even though there is no single genetic variance between people of different races. It seems reasonable to conclude that it is the loss of perceived power that these people are so concerned with. This is a particular fear for white nationalists because they're aware on some level that the United States and other Western countries created a power imbalance through colonialism. Without the exploitation of other populations and their resources, they wouldn't have the affluence that they enjoy today. And this fear, it seems, is a quiet admission of guilt.
I think I was gonna say, I think it's one of those things where these people are afraid of, a potential or like a power shift just in society or comic culture because they're afraid of they're like, it seems like they're aware of what they've been doing to, people that are, quote unquote different than them. And they're like, oh, I don't want that to boomerang that treatment back onto me.
Yeah, that's all it is.
Yeah, which is, man, people are fucking stupid. It's like, then don't treat people like that. Like, if you are afraid of some form of karma, then perhaps don't do the behavior that you're afraid of getting back to you. That's some like preschool level shit that you learn. And then you've got 40-year-old men that are afraid about it. And it's like, you clearly were not there that day of pre-K.
Right.
You missed it.
This whole thing is all about power, and it springs largely from white nationalist propaganda. Unfortunately, the days of this theory being predominantly part of the white supremacist rhetoric are in the past. Fox News' Tucker Carlson, U.S. Congressman Matt Gaetz, and even French legally has to be declared a fascist Marine Le Pen have all promoted the theory in one way or another. The Great Replacement has moved into the mainstream, which means it has now been added to the culture war. The arguments for less diversity in comic books is just another extension of this. As Leanna Kersner, creator of Lady Bits, a show about women in video games, puts it, quote, "ComicsGate is the political culture war come to comic books. I know I'm supposed to be super serious and somber about this, but the whole thing is pointless on so many levels. Comic books are a relatively small industry, so readers personalize things to a degree that's difficult for consumers of mainstream media to understand. Everyone who is a fan of comics has read a book that they felt was written just for them, and it's like a drug." And I think that is 100% accurate. Like, there's an addiction aspect to this.
Oh, I think so too. I mean, look at how I talk about Saga. I am addicted.
Yeah. It feels like it's written for someone like you. You feel super connected to it.
Exactly. Like, if you would like Exhibit A, I am here. Hello.
But so that means that this addiction is, it makes everything feel heightened to the base, the comic book community.
Yeah,
So,
because you're so attached to it in like such a mental and emotional way that anything that happens to it, you're just like, my thing.
That means maintaining white male characters is of the utmost importance, in part because it's protecting their drug of choice from change. The argument boils down to two things. The first being a fear of their straight white male characters being replaced. Whiteness and masculinity are how they define their identities, and they feel attacked. The other argument is simply feeling betrayed that a beloved character or series has changed. These two feelings allow a wide group of people to come together in their anger at the institution causing these changes. A WordPress site titled "This is ComicsGate," which I actually just found today, to be quite honest.
Oh, really?
And I really, really wish I had found it earlier because it would have made this a lot easier. It details individual accounts and their hateful rhetoric associated with the group. They exhaustively detailed many examples of anger used for racist, transphobic, sexist, or just disrespectful means. The anger and the use of that anger is the thread connecting all of ComicsGate here. Like, ComicsGate may specifically mean white superheroes to some, but it could also just as easily mean poor storytelling or anti-gay sentiments to others. It's all across the board. You get a huge group of people that just coalesce around this thing because it means different things to different people.
And it's also like, it seems like the people who are really like, headbutting this ComicsGate thing, like, they clearly don't understand like the impacts of what, those other communities are lacking. Like, so I love John Leguizamo very much. If nobody knows who John Leguizamo is, look him up. He is a famous character
He was the
actor.
Violator in the Spawn movie.
He was, and that's a perfect introduction for people who listen to this podcast. But he's fantastic, and he is more than just like a character actor. He's a fantastic performer and creator. And he did not a stand-up show, a one-man show, and it's called Latin History for Morons. And I watched it because I am a John Leguizamo fan. And I fucking cried at the end because the whole premise of it is basically he is trying to find a Latin hero for his son, who is, he's being bullied and he has like a project and he's just like, I have no heroes. So it's the whole show is like him going through like Latin history, and trying to find this hero for his son. And it cuts to him like going to therapy himself and the relationship with his son and his family and all this. And like, it's just, it made it so bluntly apparent, like how important it is to have a hero that looks like you.
Oh, yeah.
And I literally I had to eat dinner after this thing and I'm just like crying in front of my boyfriend. And I'm like, I just want I just want these children to like have people that look like them, that are just as super as all the people that I grew up with. Because, oh my God, that would be so shitty. And if you're walking around in the world not knowing like the kind of pain that is, then like, no wonder you're fucking screaming about it like it is a big deal. Like, no, give the people other kinds of people.
That reminds me a lot of a commercial that I saw around the time that the Ghost in the Shell Hollywood movie was coming out.
Oh yeah, with Scarlett
Scarlett
Johansson.
Johansson. Yeah,
Yeah.
there was a I wish I could remember exactly how it went, but there this little Asian girl, and she's like walking down the street, and she sees like in a comic book store window a bunch of like manga stuff, and she gets all excited and she goes in, she like reads, and she sees the Ghost in the Shell move, like the anime movie, and she watches that. She's all excited, and then if I remember correctly, then she sees the poster for the new Hollywood Ghost in the Shell, and she sees Scarlett Johansson, and she's like sad because it's like you
Yeah.
even changed this.
Because
Like,
you've built up this child being like, yes, like I don't know much about Ghost in the Shell, like the plot wise, but it's like
mhm,
you've given these children all of this media, like, yes, you can do like any of like, this is you and all this stuff. And then you're like, you immediately cancel that by giving this this millionaire actress another contract. And
right.
it's like, no, just kidding. Like you're not. That's fucking terrible. Like, I want to hug that child. Yeah. I will say though, on the bright side, in terms of like John Leguizamo, he's actually creating a comic series right now. It's called Phenom X, like
Yeah.
PHNMX. And it's a Latinx superhero. And
I love that.
it's so cool. I've been trying to find issues of it. I don't know if they're eventually going to make it into a book or not, but I should just start buying the just the you know what
Yeah.
the chapters. I should. I'm going to. Yeah, I'm doing it.
I like that you talked yourself into it.
It don't take much. I've been wanting to for a while, so I'm just gonna do it.
So, while it took a little while for the movement to be fully established, ComicsGate attracted an eclectic crowd nearly from the start. It wasn't just old white men joining the cause either. Multi-ethnic, multi-religious groups of people fell under the CG umbrella. The lack of a defined ideology helped make this reality, since not wanting comics to change and believing the story had grown too political were really the only two characteristics that needed to be filled. The politicization of modern storytelling is an interesting position to take, considering this started around the same time as the rise of the alt-right, Gamergate's push into far-right politics, and, of course, the Donald Trump presidency. At this point, it seemed everything was political. It was all an extension of the culture war. It becomes even more laughable when a stroll through comic book history showcases Captain America punching Nazis before the United States ever joined the war, not to mention the barrage of anti-Hitler books that followed, or Marvel's Merry Mutants fighting against a right-wing televangelist in a parallel to the struggles for civil rights. It's no secret that a majority of popular and enduring characters, and even the industry itself, came from Jewish creators who struggled to find lasting work elsewhere due to anti-Semitism. Comic books have a silly but still firmly political origin.
Yeah.
This didn't stop the movement, however, from gathering its own leaders that would continue to argue these takes ad nauseum, leading to the rise of Richard C. Meyer, which we have actually kind of talked about before, and I think you'll know who I'm talking about when we get a little further into this.
Okay. Okay. I'm strapped in.
As the milkshake incident caused an uproar on Twitter, Meyer was one of the loudest voices goading on the harassment. The sudden flurry of attention swelled Meyer's follower account, and just like Mike Cernovich or Milo Yiannopoulos before him, Meyer saw an opportunity to take advantage of the commotion while running the ironically named YouTube channel Diversity and Comics. He utilized this space to rant about everything he felt was wrong with mainstream, particularly superhero comics, which turns out to be quite a lot. As he said to the Daily Beast, quote, "I started noticing a lot more weird stuff. Feminization of men, masculinization of women, basically all the classic heterosexual pairings being destroyed. You realize this a trend, and you start wondering why they're doing it. Why is Luke Cage the quintessential blaxploitation tough guy? Why is he pushing a baby carriage and he's the wimpiest, most soft-spoken? This is not done on accident." For him, the largest motivator was what he perceived as the decoupling of sex and gender for seemingly nefarious purposes. Women are only allowed to be seen as feminine, and men could not take care of their children since this is stereotypically a female role.
Mm-hmm.
These are, to put it lightly, sexist, homophobic, and transphobic thoughts. These sentiments would seem right at home in 1950s America, but the world has moved on. Those that refuse to change see this as a problem. And the anger at the characters was not the only thing on his mind, though. As Meyer later continued, quote, one of the things about SJWs is that they get a job because of surface qualities. Being a woman, being black, being gay, being trans, and there's no adjustment on the ground to negative fan reaction due to low sales. So as he demonstrates, the creators are part of what he deemed wrong with modern comic book storytelling. On the subject of the milkshake crew, he stated, quote, they obviously seemed to not be qualified. They can't spot basic typos. They can't notice major plot holes. They antagonize the fans. I talk to all of these people, actual legitimate talents, who can't get a job to save their lives. Meanwhile, some airhead who calls the fans Nazis and turns out laughably bad work is getting Eisner Awards.
Yeah, this seems very biased.
A little bit, yeah.
It's like a little bit. Like, it's like, oh, I've met these super talented people. It's like, yeah, it's like Rick, who you go out to lunch with every Monday. Like,
it's really interesting. I try not to downplay the art in ComicsGate books. Like I try not to make fun of them, but some of it is laughable.
Yeah, no, and I mean, like, listen, like, art is so subjective. Like,
yeah,
there are certain comics that I won't pick up because I just don't love the aesthetic of it, and
right.
that's fine. Like, everybody does that. But there are some like arbitrary kind of like, you know, definitions of whether or not something is good. I feel like anywhere, you know.
Oh yeah, yeah.
So, what a time.
And the interesting thing to note here is that Meyer didn't provide, nor has he really ever, any evidence of lowered sales specific to these editors.
Mm-hmm.
If we wanted to be extremely generous and apply this statement to minority-led books like 4, which featured Jane Foster as the God of Thunder, we would see that it was outselling its previous title featuring the original Odin's Son. While some of the more diverse books sold less than their white male counterparts, it wasn't by a significant margin, and those books were often canceled at the same rate as any other book that didn't perform well enough.
Yeah.
All of this data really just implies that Marvel was trying new things and keeping the ones that work. This same strategy is what led Archie Comics to publishing horror books, emphasizing their diverse cast and relaunching with a modern aesthetic in 2015 to immense success. It's just good business.
Yeah, like, you can't stick with the same old thing forever. Like, look at McDonald's. Let's talk about Mickey D's.
Right.
Mickey D's has changed so much since it started, and it's still doing its thing. If you kept it as, like, the same exact concept as it was in, like, the 50s or 60s, like, it wouldn't be around today. Like, it wouldn't be known globally. It would have died.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Meyer's anger here at the lack of traditional gender roles and seeing women in leadership, that was just a stepping stone for his rhetoric. It got much worse very, very soon after. He called famed author and journalist Ta-Nehisi Coates a race hustler, described trans writer Magdalene Basaggio as a man in a wig who was mentally ill, frequently only commented on the physical appearance of women that he disagreed with, and referred to creators he didn't like as autistic, and I apologize for this word, retards. So, during the rise of Gamergate and the alt-right, this behavior was well established as the norm for hateful online discourse. And really, it only pushed Meyer further into the front of the pack. With his behavior incentivized, he pushed further. As reported by the Daily Beast, quote, in a private YouTube video called The Dark Roast, originally posted in November of 2017 and obtained by the Daily Beast, Meyer called one Marvel editor a cum dumpster, accused various female writers.
No! Oh, no. I forgot that we were going to hear it again.
He accused various female writers of sucking their way into the industry and mused which famous creators were pedophiles or had psychological problems. The Dark Roast is where I get to say stuff like, Dan Slott looks like a pedophile, he says in the recording. I don't have to dance around. I don't have to say parody or wink wink. This was a private letting off steam video, Meyer told the Daily Beast, confirming the video's authenticity, which had a disclaimer on it that it was for close friends only. I'm very disappointed whoever shared that with you broke that disclaimer and broke faith. I bet he fucking is. I bet he fucking is.
Yeah. My God. It just and, like, did he know that it was recorded? Like
No, this was on YouTube.
yeah.
It was set to
Like
private for only the people that he could follow, but someone was like, "Holy shit," and
oh,
sent it to the Daily
that's
Beast.
still stupid, though.
It's
It's
so
the
dumb.
internet.
Yeah.
Like, people are
Meyer's allusion
dumb.
to not needing to say wink wink relates back to many of the online trolls who try to say the quiet part out loud. Saying awful things and then pretending it's a joke is a proud tradition among the alt-right. The truth, though, is that the very specific rhetoric is what is used to instigate more harassment. Creators found that nearly anything they did, including just post a picture of themselves, caused intense waves of personal attacks. But the majority happened just after Meyer would make a video about or engage with the creator on Twitter. The exception to this rule would be the creators that are on his side, and none were more willing to back him than Ethan Van Skyver. Now, Ethan Van Skyver is going to be someone we talk about pretty much every episode until we end this.
Okay.
And Richard C. Meyer is going to come and go as we go through this, but
Yeah, he's gonna come dumpster and go.
yeah, that's right.
Sorry,
Ethan
I had to do that for me.
Ethan Van Skyver he very quickly just takes control of this movement.
Oh, okay.
You know, he sees an opportunity, and boy, did he fucking seize it.
Mm-hmm.
Most agree that Van Skyver and Meyer formed a two-man act with Meyer taking the offense and Van Skyver both promoting these actions and deflecting criticism. The two were seen as leaders of the movement, with legions of followers stepping in to argue that those who were upset with their actions were either misled or intentionally misleading others. The newfound fame may have been an exciting aspect of continuing the harassment from Meyer, but Van Skyver made his name as a controversial figure even before ComicsGate. While still working as an artist for both Marvel and DC, he released a sketchbook with the character Sinestro on the cover and named it My Struggle as a play on Hitler's famous Mein Kampf.
Oh.
To Van Skyver, this was a silly joke, one that definitely could have and was received poorly, as even his friends told him not to do it. But some fans took issue with this move. The real uproar and questions over exactly how tasteless the joke was didn't really start, however, until after he became more involved in promoting ComicsGate. This is part of the overall playbook. Humor obfuscates intention and gives built-in deniability to those perpetuating harm. While Van Skyver was most likely trying to have fun with obvious Hitler allusions, he can deny any responsibility for the outcome or the hurt others felt. The same goes for when he interacts with a creator he disagrees with and his followers then harass them. As Rachel Krishna puts it, quote, ultimately, trying to separate what's ironic, what's genuine, and what's merely a motif in Van Skyver's art is emblematic of the ongoing chaos of ComicsGate. So, for a long time, Van Skyver refused to acknowledge any affiliation with the ComicsGate movement and instead claimed to be a victim of the culture war. To him, the jokes were just jokes, and if his followers were responsible for harassment, then he couldn't be held responsible because he didn't directly send them to do so. Except he also didn't really do much to end that harassment either. It's been well documented how he would tell people he disagreed with to kill themselves and mock others relentlessly. In one breath, Van Skyver would claim he was against bigotry in all forms, and in the next claim Donald Trump's followers, including himself, were coming to clean up after the queer globalist mess, sending a clear message that queerness was part of the problem. If then his followers harassed queer fans or creators, Van Skyver felt that his hands were clean. This is perhaps exemplified best in his his reaction to an article written specifically about this harassment. Quote, when asked about the behavior of his followers in instances like this, Van Skyver replied to the Daily Beast via email, I think my fans are the best, and there are 4 exclamation points. I always appreciate their support for me and for my art. Which is just such a shitty way to answer.
I think it's one of those things, I mean, I feel like we've seen this before with like the Gamergate. And I feel like just kind of in a lot of things in general where these people who have a lot of following and then are intentionally saying, like, nasty shit are like,
Yeah.
"Oh, but I have no responsibility, like, for these people who see me as a role model." It's like, when you're a role model, yes, you have a responsibility, like, you need to accept that. And clearly a lot of these people aren't because they just see their followers as, like, faceless and are like, "Man, but they have my opinion."
Yeah, it doesn't matter to them.
Yeah.
It's completely removed from, yeah. Like as time went on, Van Skyver's bullying behavior, his support for ComicsGate, and his own trolling garnered an extreme amount of interest from all sides. His YouTube channel became another source for pretty strange behavior. I I just as a side note, I have watched an ungodly amount of this man's YouTube
Is
channel.
he also fake drinking liquids? And
No, this
oh,
one's not.
okay.
No, but he there are so many instances. I had to stop myself from cutting out so many clips of him just blatantly lying about things very early on. But we will cover some of these things. So like there's a YouTube video he did where um I really wanted to dissect every bit of it. We could sit here for fucking 15 hours. Um but one of the things that he says like several times early on is he's never seen any harassment from Comicsgate, and that is just
But
a
that's what the
fucking
majority
lie.
of it is.
That's yes. It is such bullshit. He's like, oh, it's only coming from the other way. And to be clear, I don't think I make a good like I don't do a whole lot of emphasis on this, but there is harassment coming the other direction too.
Oh, I
Um,
believe that. Yeah.
it's
You
just
see
that
that
like
everywhere. There's extremes on both sides, whether it
yeah
is, like, legitimate, like, in actual politics or in any form of media. Like, yeah, it's very hard to find people who are kinda just in the middle nowadays because
yeah.
of algorithms and other things that we could have a whole other podcast on.
Mhm.
So, I am not surprised that, like, people that would probably agree with me more are even more extreme and then yelling at them.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
So, not surprised.
The constant barrage of anger that comes from Ethan Van Sciver on his YouTube channel, that could be just enough. Like we could be fine talking about that. But
Mhm.
probably the most concerning action to spring from this was the early promotion of a Gamergate supporter, alt-right activist, and Christian nationalist Vox Day. Now, when I say that like Van Sciver promoted him, I mostly mean he gave him a platform, and he did push back a little bit, but they had a very loving conversation. And I
Ah,
listened to all of it. And I will like Van Sciver, they're not friends. They do not like each other. But this is early on
yeah,
when they meet each other. And I think there was a vested interest in both of them trying to get along.
right.
So Day is another player in this drama with a long history of courting controversy. Known for his support of the alt-right and the outright bigoted views that he holds, such as claiming black men are 500 times more likely to possess a gene variant that is linked to violence and aggression than white American men, his actions have led him to being banned from Twitter and many other social media sites. So he's already got racist down.
Yeah, that's
Uh,
definitely checked, like, twice.
Yeah. His rhetoric may seem like he sits firmly on the side of white supremacists, and to be clear, his actual words do support this, but Day claims not to fit into this category. His reasoning? He refuses the title white supremacist not on ideological terms, but because he identifies as Native American and as such finds white supremacists to be offensive. I also don't know like his actual percentage of like Native American, but I'm gonna guess it's real low.
Right.
I just
Okay.
throwing that out there.
Heard.
Christian nationalist will have to do. We'll stick with that over white supremacist.
Yeah. I think that's enough to
We're fine
to
with that.
to identify that I would not want to hang out with this person.
Right? Not surprisingly, considering he wound up being affiliated with multiple hate campaigns, Day also has a history of issues with women. On the reasoning for opposing women's rights to vote, he claimed they are significantly inclined to vote for whoever they would rather fuck.
Okay. Well, no. That's just incorrect. This would be on, one of those, I just found, like, completely incorrect Reddit, where it's,
Oh,
like
yeah.
where they're just confidently totally incorrect.
Oh, yeah.
Um, this would be on there.
Oh,
'Cause
definitely.
it's also, like, a lot of the people that we are, you know, the option to vote for,
Mhm.
not very appealing.
I
Like,
also
I'll
on
say that right now. So
just on the subject of, Reddit, I highly recommend, the subreddit Bad Women's Anatomy.
oh, no.
It's so good. It's people that are very confused about how women work, but very confidently describing how women work.
Yeah. Very confidently incorrect on understanding women's bodies.
Yeah. There seems to be no end to the contrarian point of view that Vox Day is willing to take. He's even gone so far as to claim the Norwegian terrorist Anders Breivik was a hero for killing 77 people that he deemed future Marxists. Ultimately, it seems Day has a little care for those that aren't like him and outright anger at anyone he views as restricting his actions or his worldview, despite most of the consequences he's faced being due to his own vitriol. In other words, just like all of the early co-opters of Gamergate, that's just who he is.
Yeah.
And fittingly, Day often comes up in conversation with Milo Yiannopoulos or Mike Cernovich. But unlike his compatriots, Day is more than willing to attack others on the right at nearly any time. He's even gone so far as to write a book criticizing Jordan Peterson, an extremely influential psychologist known for anti-trans and anti-feminist rhetoric. I would also say that, like, Ethan Van Skyver, I believe, did some artwork for Jordan Peterson. So that might be another reason
Oh.
why they don't like each other.
Yeah, probably.
The penchant for fighting with others is possibly what often puts him into trouble even with his own community. It didn't take long for Vox, who was very supportive of the ComicsGate movement, to be ostracized and trashed even by Ethan Van Skyver, who had helped to platform him to the comic book community. Before ComicsGate, though, Day took his Gamergate tactics to the Hugo Awards. And when I say like his Gamergate tactics, he literally was a very outspoken proponent of Gamergate. Like,
Right.
he was there, you know. As nominations began to for the literary award ceremony, the Hugo Awards, many conservatives felt anger towards a slate of diverse stories. This led to a campaign known as the Sad Puppies, which decided to game the system and nominate what they viewed as classical science fiction and to promote politically conservative authors. Brad Torgerson of the Sad Puppies defended this by claiming that those in charge of the Hugos were running a clique for liberal stances. He states, quote, "They don't want the Hugos to be about popular as much as they want the Hugos to be about important, which is an entirely different mindset. Especially when you have the arrival in the last 10 years of social justice agitators who are demanding that books and stories now be recognized and anointed due to the fact that the author or the characters meet a given set of minority demographics." Which is an interesting quote.
That is a very interesting quote. There's a lot there's a lot in there.
Oh my. What
Yeah.
Torgerson actually illustrates here is a tactic that's used over and over again by agitators in every field. This has been seen through Gamergate, this has been seen in ComicsGate, and this is seen in the Sad Puppies campaign just as well. Using politically radicalized language allows them to manipulate others into a block that can be pushed and pulled in whatever direction they seem fit. The implicit instructions are, if you support our cause, you will do what we say. This served to, in their minds, showcase a plethora of conservative authors that aren't getting noticed. Unfortunately, that's not what happened. In
Yeah.
reality, John C. Wright received 6 separate nominations for his work, with one being disqualified later, meaning this push for diverse conservative authors coalesced more or less around one man. So, like, they weren't even trying to hide. It was just about conservatism here, you know?
Yeah.
Let's go with the one dude. Hugo Award-winning author Abigail Nussbaum, I'm sorry about the name, summarized it best by stating, quote, "If your argument is that there's a vibrant field of conservative, politically, stylistically, or both, science fiction being written that isn't being recognized by the Hugos, then the fact that the fully 1/3 of the works of fiction you got onto the ballot are by the same person isn't a strong point in support of it."
Yeah, no, not at all.
Complicating matters even more, the objection to Wright's nomination also stemmed from some key skeletons hidden in his closet. While most have been removed, John C. Wright had authored several anti-gay posts and even called Nickelodeon's The Legend of Korra a sexual aberration. To the sad puppies, his views should not be considered when discussing the merits of his work. There is some irony in this thinking as well, since they were frequently criticized for their lack of diversity. The sad puppies also put a heavy emphasis on women, people of color, and the LGBTQ writers, while still focusing on conservative views in space opera science fiction, effectively becoming the exact same thing that they campaigned against.
Yeah.
So the Rabid Puppies campaign, however,
There's
never
so many
felt
puppies. Oh my god.
I don't even remember. I looked up why it was called Sad Puppies and then Rabid Puppies, and I don't remember. I'm pretty sure it's just it's like related to a story that was involved. But like,
Gotcha.
so sad puppies was a thing that was like conservatives trying to push conservative views, right?
Mhm.
We want our books to be represented. Which, fair enough, that's fine. I don't care. But like, maybe
then
not
they
at the
picked,
expense
like,
of other people.
just this one person.
Right.
Yeah.
Rabid Puppies is a different campaign.
Yeah.
Rabid Puppies was started by Vox Day, who wanted to platform the same type of creators, but he instructed his followers to vote for the entire slate precisely as they are. So he was like, here's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. You're going to vote for all of these people in this order.
Right.
And this does away with the implicit instruction and makes the demands for his followers explicit.
Mhm.
These authors were to be promoted and were not merely suggested. You had to go with this group.
Right.
And some added controversy to all of this comes from Day's use of this list to promote books from his own publishing house and even secure nominations for himself. So there was a vested interest in him doing this.
And this, at this point, is feeling a lot less about comics and just more about, like, personal business and politics. So it's like
Yeah. So this particular thing is this happened before ComicsGate, but this was his way of like taking over a science fiction like thing and making it really about him and his people, right?
Right.
And that's something that's going to continue as he moves into ComicsGate.
Gotcha.
So to understand how all of this came to be, it's important to put the events into a somewhat natural order. Van Skyver brought Day onto his YouTube channel after noticing that he had created a comic book called Alt Hero, featuring a woman clad in the Confederate flag.
Oh.
Day both argues that he did this to antagonize the SJWs and that the Confederate flag doesn't stand for racism like they claim. To illustrate this point, he points to other countries like that use what is we would consider the Confederate flag, which would be a valid point, except when talking about American politics, it's important to keep context.
Yeah. I was about to say context is pretty important, and if you know the context, then you're doing it anyway, so there's clearly a problem here.
Other countries don't always utilize the same symbology when adopting cultural points as their own, which would be why you get some of these flags showing up in other countries that don't mean the same thing. In many countries, the flag does symbolize a type of rebellion. The difference here, however, is that in America, it became widely adopted by segregationists after there was a strong push for civil rights. Its origin is steeped in a fight for the slavery of Black people, and its modern popularity is attributed to opposing their rights. These are firmly in line with Day's stances, but he couches the true history of these events behind false equivalencies. With his hero garbed in hate, he pushed forward with a crowdfunding campaign for the comic and received an immense amount of money, to which even Van Skyver pointed out a good chunk of which came from high-dollar private donations, including from the model whose likeness was used for the main character as a marketing campaign. So, like, there's some sketchy shit going on here.
Yeah.
It may seem odd that this very overtly political comic book caught Ethan Van Skyver's attention in a way that he felt the need to interview the creator, but that's only because Van Skyver's own motivation is also a bit shaky. In his own interview with Day, Van Skyver mentions that he wants to create apolitical comics, that he wants to annoy SJWs with his work, and that his own writing would be political. It makes sense that when put into the context of just being fundamentally opposed to seeing liberal stories and diverse characters in mainstream comics, their stance is formed entirely by opposition rather than firm ideology.
Yeah.
And so the interview itself is not really much to comment on. I listened to it's a fucking long interview. I mean, I say that, and we're gonna do probably over 2 hours with this.
That's fine.
So the two creators have a polite, albeit tense conversation since Van Skyver doesn't seem to really agree with Day's approach to comic books. It is mainly interesting because either Van Skyver is unaware of Day's long history of controversial behavior, even though he is a public figure and all of this is easily discoverable through a cursory glance at Google, or he doesn't care. It never comes up. And that's something that is going to be kind of a thing with Ethan Van Skyver.
Right.
Like when he ever interviews people, whenever things come up, it's like he ignores the bad stuff until he's actively like against that person.
Right. He kind of like tests the waters before he just like starts splashing around.
I think he's good at being like, these people are good for the movement and therefore they're useful. And then when they're no longer useful, hey, I knew about this bad stuff the entire time.
Yeah, which is weird because you would think that tactic would not work because it's like, all right, well, if you fucking knew about this the whole time, then why should we keep listening to you? But
yeah,
I
but
guess
that's also
people
like
aren't
Alex
reading
Jones
into
does
it
that
too
shit
much.
all the time too. Yeah.
Yeah, he's on that confidently incorrect thing a lot.
I'm sure he is.
He was like the first thing that came up, and I was like, oh, hello, sir. Goodbye now.
Ethan Van Skyver and Vox Day mostly disagree about exactly how political comic books should be, even though they both agree with the need to push back and defeat SJWs. The reaction to platforming Day, though, was a big deal and actually gave Van Skyver an automatic defense for pushback. Often, this video was claimed as Van Skyver's secret plan to introduce a supposed white nationalist to his followers and get their support for these ideas. And there's absolutely no evidence to support this. But what did occur is that Day suddenly found an audience more likely to support his comic book endeavors. Van Skyver gains the ability to claim victimhood since his motivation isn't as clear as his accusers seem to make it, and Vox Day gains an audience. Throughout their interview, Day makes it very clear that publishing alt-right comic books was a strategic choice made to appeal to a different audience and to make more money. With that audience found, Day moved fully into ComicsGate the way he and others moved into Gamergate. So in September of 2018, just a year after the harassment took full swing, Vox Day announced a new comic book publishing imprint named ComicsGate. The idea, it seems, was to push the envelope even further with a logo stating 100% SJW free, and promising to only publish comic books brought to them by ComicsGate supporters. The logo sports a green and purple color scheme, which is a nod to Day's Gamergate affiliation, since the green and purple combination was adopted early on in the Gamergate movement, possibly as a reference to a 4chan meme where a character from Dragon Ball Z rapes another character. Because everything has to be bad. Like, I don't, like, all I know, that's a rumor about why this is this way. I don't know if that's true, but, like, fuck it. It probably is. It comes from fucking 4chan. I don't know.
It's also, like, crazy that it's like, oh my god, these are just, like, such, like, arbitrarily, like, bad things and themes.
Yeah.
Like, how do you not, like, picture yourself as a villain?
Well,
like,
I mean, even
it just seems like they're all being grifters, but
absolutely.
in terms of meanness, it's just weird.
Well, there is money to be made here. There's a lot of money to be made.
Oh, I'm sure there has to be. Because it's like, man, I don't know. There was nothing else apparently I had to say after that. But I'm sure people are making money because they're making all these videos and making public statements, and people are getting views on that. So
we'll get into how some of the money is made later.
Oh no.
The comic book imprint clearly had its own adversarial approach, right? Like you don't have the logo itself say 100% SJW free if you're like coming into this like we're for everybody. Like you're saying fuck off to a certain group of people.
You're intentionally trying to piss people off.
What Vox Day probably didn't anticipate was the immense amount of pushback from the ComicsGate movement that they chose to champion. Richard Meyer immediately disavowed this move, and Ethan Van Skyver went further, stating, quote, Vox Day tried to steal hashtag ComicsGate. ComicsGate destroyed him tonight, live. Which is just, this is how these people fucking talk too. Like it's
Yeah,
intense and
it's the sad and the rabid puppies and the Dragon Ball Z sad stuff.
mm.
Got a guy named after Fox News, or no, maybe that's Vice, but still,
Yeah.
it's
The
a
the struggle
lot.
for the struggle for control of ComicsGate turned into what could be seen as an all-out war between Ethan Van Sciver and Vox Day. What followed, however, involved a great deal more people and a struggle to define the term ComicsGate as legal battles began. Meyer and other creators associated with the ComicsGate movement had flocked to crowdfunding websites in order to raise funds for their projects.
Mhm.
Some, including those created by Meyer, raised hundreds of thousands of dollars, and backers waited for years in some instances to get the books that they helped to fund. So one of the things with Meyer in particular, I'm not sure if I mentioned this here or not, but like he would launch a book and it would make, let's go with like $100,000, right? Like it
Sure.
makes a boatload of money.
Yeah.
And before he ever finishes that book, before it ever gets shipped out to the people that paid for it, he starts another another comic book project and asks for another like 20,000 or 30,000, and like
Right.
it just keeps like, so before people are ever actually getting the first thing they paid for, he's asking for more money for
Yeah,
a
so it's
different
kind of a
thing.
bit of a gamble for his, like, you know, followers,
Mhm.
I guess, because it's like, "You haven't given me the first thing yet. How can I trust you to give you more money?"
Right.
But
So, like, critics accuse these creators of grifting money from their well-intentioned backers, and I would say yes. It should be noted that the majority of these books did actually get printed. Like, there were actual books that were printed. But the
okay.
long delays and arrogant dismissals from Meyer cast a dark shadow on ComicsGate and, like, as a movement for that time. Day's new imprint could threaten this even more. So there's already like people being mad that you're not getting this thing and you're grifting money. And then here comes this Gamergate guy who's also a Christian nationalist who is trying to get more books pushed out. And it seems like they're all fighting against each other.
Yeah, and it's honestly like, to those people who are like, "No, this isn't what we wanted," it's like, what else did you expect? Like,
Yeah.
you know? At this point in time, like, when you are like, "I just want things to be, plain Jane, white vanilla man," like,
Mhm.
there are not many people that are so vocal about that other than, like, your white supremacists and, just generally racist and misogynist people. And then when you're like, "Oh, I don't like that," it's like, "Okay, well then, like, what do you want?" You
Yeah.
know? Like, what are you complaining about then? Just buy the like, I don't think any of, like, these straight white male stories have, like, decreased. It's just been, like, more media in general is just being pumped out, you
Yeah.
know?
Absolutely.
So it's just all very, like, ridiculous. I can't say
Just
silly because people are, there's racists involved, and that is annoying and stupid and,
I still
probably
think it's
scary for
worth
some
I think
people.
I think silly is still a good term that can be used because I think making sure people know like racism isn't silly.
For
However,
sure.
the people are silly. These are
This
some
is
fucking
true.
weird, yeah.
Yeah, that's
Just
fair.
just 2 days after announcing the Comicsgate imprint, Day responded to the backlash by trying to explain their intentions and lay some of the blame on Ethan Van Sciver's supposed need to control the movement. In fact, Day publicly rescinded his offer to work with Van Sciver due to a threatened lawsuit. Supposedly, Van Sciver believed that since he ran a Comicsgate Live YouTube show, he would be entitled to trademarking the name. So, like, his YouTube thing would be like Comicsgate Live, and then he streams for 2 hours,
Yeah,
which I guess there's something there.
yeah.
Um, Anger over this and the political nature of the books drove discourse further, and Day's response to the complaints that his comic books were too politically motivated actually revealed some of the flawed logic in the movement itself. In his words, quote, "Comics have always had political and ideological elements to them. The core problem with what the SJWs are doing in comics is less about how they are inserting their lunatic politics into comics and more about the way in which they are ideologically policing who is permitted to produce and publish comics at Marvel, DC, Image, IDW, and other comics publishers. Day's stance revealed that he believed conservatives and others with right-leaning political views were barred from creating comics at the major publishers, and this was partially why the books took what he deemed SJW stances. This exact mentality will be parroted by others in the movement further on, but it's also important to note that during all of this time, Ethan Van Sciver, a fervent supporter of Donald Trump and a hard conservative, was concurrently working on multiple DC titles like Green Lantern and Batman, and had worked for Marvel on flagship titles like New X-Men in the past. Huge names like Chuck Dixon and Mike Baron, both conservative writers, helmed Batman and Punisher for years. While it's true that those creators don't get nearly as much work as they did in their heydays, it also happens to coincide with a new batch of writers becoming the hit makers of their time. These new writers became the darlings of the industry, and so there happened to be less for those that weren't in favor. Added on to this, abhorrent behavior like telling others to kill themselves or sprouting conspiracy theories on social media gives the publishers an incentive to not hire what they see as liabilities. Like,
Yeah.
That's what we're getting here. You know, it's not a conspiracy against these people. It's
You're
ebbs and
behaving
flows of the
badly
market
and we don't
in
want to
your
hire
behavior.
you.
Yeah. With the rise of Gamergate and the alt-right, these behaviors became far more common. Plenty of artists and writers made their names but lost out on future jobs or even current jobs due to sneaking racist messages into their art or poor social media behavior, such as attacking Marvel or DC for their perceived grievances. The question becomes, does Marvel or DC need to hire people who refuse to acknowledge their editorial direction? And the answer is clearly no. Chuck Dixon is a perfect example of a writer who made his name in the industry, but then did multiple interviews bashing both Marvel and DC before choosing to work for Vox Day, a hard-right Christian nationalist who claims black people are genetically inclined to be more violent, on titles based around the QAnon conspiracy theory. He is the definition of a liability to a company not looking to be associated with this behavior.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean that their plight is any less valid, but it does mean that they are not guaranteed a fucking job.
Yeah, like when you're job searching, you look at the mission statement of the company. This is the thing that is constantly taught and practiced. If
Mhm.
you're not matching the mission statement, then your luck isn't going to be very good, probably. Um, Clearly, this man's not reading the mission statement.
Well, and I think it's also like, it's not necessarily the mission statement, but it is sort of like general common sense.
Yeah.
If you are not exhibiting, it's like a date, right? Like if you go on a date with someone, one of the first things you're going to look for is, does this person seem to have common sense? Are they matching social cues, right? And
Yeah.
if not, probably not a good match for you, or at least the things that you're looking for.
It's a constant vibe check. And if your
Right.
vibes are clearly like not fitting yours or your company's or just, the agenda, then they're not going to want to pursue you.
Right. And the truth is that there's a lot of work that can and should be done about how creators are treated at these companies. Millions, sometimes billions of dollars are made by the publishers that don't go to the people who made the comics, the characters, or wrote the stories that were turned into record-breaking movies. These creators should be compensated fairly, but again, a job is not guaranteed to any creator that doesn't sell well or has brought negative press due to their actions. If their personal life only affected them, like Professor Marston and his polyamorous relationship, that wouldn't be an issue. Doing public interviews where you claim Marvel and DC are intentionally sabotaging the industry is another thing entirely.
Yeah.
Essentially, what's at issue here isn't conservatism, it's consequences for harming a brand or a person. The push that has led many to decide that they would publish their own books and label them ComicsGate, either with Vox Day's imprint or without,
Mhm.
like that's a thing that I think they're doing this as a way to sort of escape what is happening in the world. You know,
Yeah.
things are getting a little bit more diverse and they don't want that. So then
Mhm.
they decide to remove themselves from that situation. And some of these people speak out very loudly and are then pushed away. And then that is used as a way to claim victimhood. right? It's just, it's
Yeah.
insane. During all of this time, these legal battles over ComicsGate and who would be involved and who gets to own this. Antonio J. Malpica applied to register the term ComicsGate as a publishing trademark just days after Day's own announcement. Now, I also want to say that the way that he tried to trademark ComicsGate, I got there eventually. He used it as two
Good
different
effort.
words. Thank you. Like he did comics space gate, whereas most of the time it's ComicsGate, one word.
Right.
And his lawyers argued that, quote, ComicsGate appearing in the mark means or signifies or is a term of art for the unity between consumers and creators that have been ostracized in the comic book industry due to their political beliefs and or from expressing their desires to read apolitical storytelling in comics for people of color, creed, nationality, gender, identity, and people from all walks of life in the relevant trade of industry or as used in connection with the goods, services, collective membership organization listed in the application, which is all just legal speak of saying what ComicsGate fucking is. It's these people who are ostracized politically. And the same argument pops up here about creators who are ostracized for their political beliefs over and over. The beliefs that never get fully detailed. And it's no wonder considering the majority of these beliefs spring from not wanting to see women or people of color helming titles once held by white men. Without opposition, though, this application was approved and the trademark was provisionally granted. By March of 2020, however, the United States government marked the application as abandoned because no statement of use or extension request timely filled after notice of allowance was issued. Essentially, they did not use the trademark, prove that they were going to use the trademark, or file an extension to prepare for use of that trademark. So you can't just hold on to a trademark for no fucking reason.
Yeah.
But this is where the legality of all this gets a little bit trickier. Preston Poulter, an outspoken critic of the movement who regularly runs YouTube videos covering Last Week in ComicsGate, filed for use of the term under one word, ComicsGate, right? So now it's one word. And speaking to Bleeding Cool, Poulter stated, I registered ComicsGate, one word. As I publish comic books, it won't be hard to publish a book that uses the trademark, which no one else has done to date. I will establish criteria over who can use the trademark that will forbid engaging in online harassment, the doxing of customers, or failure to fulfill in a timely fashion. So he's just saying, fuck you guys. I'm taking this word, and if you want to use ComicsGate, you got to go through me. And you got to be like a better person than you've been fucking acting.
Yeah. Oh, that's cool.
So he basically decided to troll the entire movement. The unfortunate side effect to this would be setting himself up in direct opposition to ComicsGate, which has shown itself to be quick to harass.
Yeah.
This
it is turning its ugly head.
This led to some bad stuff.
Oh no.
Some explicit videos between Poulter and his ex-wife featuring kink play were found and distributed by the ComicsGate community, and Ethan Van Skyver in particular.
Oh.
Now, I really struggled on how to write about this because they are public videos. They were put out. Poulter's ex-wife is a dominatrix, and this was part of their career.
Yeah.
However, their personal names were never used.
Okay.
And they were under like fake names. And they do have children. So I am like, this is as much as I'm really going to talk about it, because I don't want to get into all of that.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I mean, it seems kind of at the bottom line like the ComicsGate people just basically revenge porned.
Yes.
This man.
Yes.
Yeah.
And Van Skyver took the opportunity to share these videos and to mock Poulter for his role in them, even after the police were asked to investigate this as a case of revenge porn, just as you said.
Yeah.
Information regarding this is very scarce, but it is very likely that the charge for revenge porn may never come, as there are questions as to whether this label could apply.
I'm just gonna pause real quick. A fox just strolled past in my yard for like 5 minutes I thought it was a dog lost. It is a fox. It is left now, but that was really cool, and I had to tell somebody. Anyway, revenge porn, sadness, continue.
I'm definitely keeping that in, by the way.
Oh, okay.
So
Sorry.
the use of personal attacks against someone's sexuality and their private life, it never ceased, and it stands as a symbol of the appalling behavior of the community asking for acceptance. I really have very little patience for the people that decided to mock him for his role in these videos.
Yeah, that's not okay on, like, multiple levels. And then,
Yeah.
like, to demand respect, like, I'm going to shame somebody for something that has no right to be shamed, but
Right.
also, like, represent me. Like, no, fuck you. Like, be nice to people.
Also, just gonna point this out here. Like, you're shaming someone for, like, having sex. Like,
Yeah. Like,
all right,
this
like,
isn't the Salem witch trials. We're
right.
over this. Like, move on.
Having sex with their wife at the time.
Yeah,
So,
with their
like,
wife.
what the fuck?
It's good. It's consensual, sex in a healthy, committed relationship. Like,
Right.
what is there to shame there? Nothing. There's nothing there.
So, Poulter doubled down and added a registration for ComicsGate as a certification mark, essentially stating that he would need to approve all of the books that are labeled as ComicsGate. And around the time, the abandoned trademark for ComicsGate, 2 words, was revived by Antonio Malpica with an extension granted by the US government. Then, Anthony Romano filed for trademark for ComicsGate Comics, which coincides with Romano's LLC of the same name. So 3 different men staked their claim to the ownership of the name, creating both confusion and anger for those invested in the matter.
Yeah.
Even worse, like, Poulter then accused Malpica of fraud, claiming that the declaration of use of ComicsGate mark in commerce didn't actually happen until after filing for an extension. These cases are, as of this writing, still under review. Like, I have no fucking idea what's going on here.
Yeah,
But,
I'm
like,
sure the lawyers are equally confused.
it's all over the place. And
Yeah.
this is not the end of the complicated legal battles tied up in ComicsGate, though. There's plenty to dive into, including swatting accusations, supposed left-wing agents within ComicsGate, and a response from Marvel Comics itself.
Mm.
And we will look at all of that in upcoming episodes.
Okay. Heard.
So you got a good introduction to ComicsGate.
Yeah. This was
how are
a
you
big
feeling about it?
spoonful of hot soup.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's really hot soup.
And there's several more episodes on this topic. This is, I just, like, the people introduced here, mostly Vox Day will show up a couple times. Richard C. Meyer will show up a few times. Ethan Van Skyver is going to be a big deal throughout most of this. Like, I thought it was really important to introduce those characters, give you a good idea of, like, the start of, like, how ComicsGate came to be, what they stood for. And then, like, when we get to the next episode, I will go through some of their claims. Like, they have specific claims about the industry as a whole, and whether or not they make any sense.
Yeah.
And
I'm gonna guess that a lot of them don't make sense.
Oh no. And I'm really happy with some of the research. I for the next episode, I did reach out to a couple of people to get approval for using some things, including some sales figures that we're going to go over. And so I'm sorry, there's going to be some math in the next episode.
That's okay.
We're gonna deal with, like, inflation. We're gonna deal with, like, statistics. We'll get through it together. I promise. It's not as bad as it seems.
That's fine. You've already done more than what most of these people have done, and which is provide good logos.
Yeah.
So, good job.
I appreciate it. So until we come back, you can find more information, including all of the sources for today's episode, at comicallypedantic.com. You can also follow us on Twitter and Instagram by searching @pedanticcast and @Derek L. Chase on both platforms. New episodes come out most Sundays on iTunes, Stitcher, Google Podcasts, Spotify, and at comicallypedantic.com. This show is entirely listener supported. If you'd like to support the show, help us stay ad-free, and possibly be mentioned on air, you can check out the Patreon link at the top of comicallypedantic.com. If you have any comments or questions, you can send them in text or audio recording to comicallypedantic@gmail.com. Please indicate if you'd like your name or question read on the air. And we will be back soon with another deep dive into the culture of comics. But until then, you can find more exciting adventures at your local comic shop.
Woohoo!